Okay, it's part two, and it's time to talk about Donald Trump. What are his chances? Now, I'm sure there were a load of you who were very excited when I said Donald Trump born in Jamaica, because you probably thought, oh, fantastic, why hasn't anyone said that before? That means he's not eligible to run for president. This is what we've been waiting for. But apparently there's a Jamaica in Queens, New York, which a lot of you in America will already know. So, what are we going to say about Donald? Well, I remember back in 2003, it was during the first Iraq, well, not the first, it was the second Iraq war, or the invasion, or the illegal war, whatever people call it then, and the Iraqi information minister came and called Donald Rumsfeld flamboyant and quite frankly very cheap. So I just wonder what he'd have to say about Donald Trump. Probably a similar thing. But I'm not going to diss Donald Trump, because a lot of people had already been doing that. And I think he has 5 children who speak extremely highly of him. And even his ex-wife, Ivana Trump, speaks well of him, and they're still friends. And I heard it from her own mouth when she was over here in the UK in the Big Brother house, right here in Boreham Wood. So I think a lot of people, especially men, should think twice before they diss Donald Trump, because there are a lot of men whose children have nothing good to say about them as fathers. And he has 5 children who speak well of him, so that's something. Okay, so Donald Trump is Gemini, and his running mate, Mike Pence, is also Gemini. As far as Gemini presidents, well, JFK, Gemini, and George Bush Sr. was also Gemini. So they've got some form in terms of running the United States. Donald Trump has Leo rising. As you can see, all his planets are on the eastern side of the chart. So although his name's Donald John Trump, his name could well be Donald Mimi Trump, because it's all about him. He's got a very powerful personality. He's very secure in himself. He projects very well. He's got an awful lot of front as well. If you see here, he has Mars rising in Leo. That's this whole alpha male thing that he's projecting. He is very assertive, quite arrogant. He's got confidence in himself. But Mars in Leo does make a good leader, and they're often really inspiring. They get people going, and they get people quite fired up, because Mars being in a fire sign, and that's what he's certainly done, is get people fired up. I mean, Naomi Campbell once said, I don't get out of bed for less than $10,000. And I think, well, who's going to get out of bed on a cold November morning to go and vote for, say, like Mitt Romney or one of the others that were running, Cruz or Rubio? They're not. But people are going to get up to go and vote for Donald Trump, aren't they? Because he's encouraging a lot of people who've never voted before to be inspired about politics and to become more engaged. So that's something to do with his Mars in Leo. I see he has Venus conjunct Saturn, and that is square Jupiter. Now that's quite interesting, because a lot of people who are born into wealth or to parents who have a lot of political influence have that exact combination. So Leo Blair, who is the son of Tony and Cherie Blair, who was born in Downing Street just after 1997 when they came into power, he has that exact combination. So that's quite a common one for people who are born into families which have a lot of prestige, a lot of power, a lot of political power or influence. He has Mercury square Neptune. Now I did linger on that aspect for quite a while, because it's an odd one for a businessman. It's more kind of arty, that particular aspect. It indicates someone who's creative, but perhaps a little bit woolly-minded when it comes to facts, figures, and things like that. But not at all. I think this indicates that he has very strong powers of persuasion. If you think about it, he knows how to play on people's emotions when he communicates. He knows that the way to influence people is to get at their emotions, get at their fears, their anxieties. You can't convince people with facts, with economics, with rationale, because people switch off, and that's exactly what happened in the Brexit debate. The stronger inside, they really focused on the economic argument, bombarding us with scare stories, all very factually based, what experts had said. It bored people, they switched off, they responded to things that were more emotionally based, like taking your country back, take control again, pride in Britain. That's what people respond to, and that's what Donald Trump is using. If you think about it as well, he's very visual in the way he communicates with people. Like he talks about Building a wall. Well, who can't imagine a wall? It's a very concrete thing that you imagine in your mind. And when he had that other spat with Megyn Kelly and he was talking about blood coming from her eyes, blood coming from other places, well, it was graphic, but it was visual. And I think that typifies how the visualness of how he speaks really makes an impression in people's minds. And so for that reason, he is persuasive and he does know where to go in. He's very perceptive at what people are feeling and maybe what they're feeling that they're not even saying, and he's going to go for that. Whereas Hillary is running quite a rational campaign. She's appealing to people's, maybe their higher nature or their more logical reasoning powers. He's not appealing to that. He's going for something totally else, and he's getting people really wound up on that. If you see here, Neptune is in the second house, this house of finances. That indicates to me the bankruptcies he's had that people talk about. But they're probably overstating the point, really. There are over 500 companies to which he has his name, so he's really got one company per risk factor, so if one goes wrong, it doesn't drag all the others down with them. So it really is good business strategizing rather than a case of, oh, well, he's a bad businessman because he's got a couple of bankruptcies. I don't see that as a point. Anyway, in his words, when you make $400 million a year, what difference does it make? That's what he says. And then he probably goes like, because I've noticed he always does that. So, but what really was the kind of slam dunk moment for me in looking at Donald Trump's chart was when I look up here and I see Sun. It's also in the 10th house, the same as Hillary, the house of leadership, high public office, and it's conjunct the North Node. So what does that mean? And his moon is conjunct the South Node. It means that he was born at the time of a lunar eclipse, which is fairly unusual. Now in nature, a lunar eclipse is quite a significant event. And anyone born at that time is a force of nature, someone with great creativity, leadership ability, someone who is an influencer, someone who has the power to create change in the world and to get things done. So the fact that he's born at that is fairly significant, and it probably does point towards the kind of sort of career he's had in business. But what is more interesting for me is I thought, oh well, he's born at the time of the lunar eclipse. Now what are the nodes doing during the election? So I solar arc progressed the nodes, and I found out the North Node at the time of the election is slap bang on his ascendant, which of course is even more significant because his ascendant is Leo, so his ruling planet is the Sun, which is connected to the nodes. And when the nodes conjunct with the ascendant, it means a major event, a climactic point, something really significant happening in a person's life. Now not only are the solar arc progressed node in that position along the ascendant, but I had a look at the transiting nodes are going to be moving right to be conjunct with his ascendant in early November. So for me, for someone whose whole chart is linked, his most elevated planet is linked to the nodes, Sun and Moon, the time of the solar eclipse, and then the nodes being conjunct his ascendant, which is a major trigger point in the chart, that for me was the time when I started, for the first time, to think, wait a minute, Trump could win this. So that for me was that significant. But when I go on and look at the other transits, they are not insignificant either. So once again, we have, I think I'll talk about the transits first. We have his transiting Pluto, which is over here in Capricorn, is squaring Jupiter in Libra. Now, Pluto is the power planet. Jupiter is all about expansion, leadership, politics. So the fact that those two are coming together is significant. Plus, when those two planets come in square, the person always has a home move. So if he does become president, he's going to be moving into the White House and living in Washington, D.C. for probably the first time in his life, because he normally lives in New York and at his various other hotel locations. So that says to me he's going to be moving home soon. So again, points towards this seizing of control, taking of power. Uranus is squaring this very important Venus-Saturn conjunction here, which has a lot to do with business, but is also to do with this almost birthright he has of being in control, in political control. And Venus rules his Taurian midheaven, so the fact that Uranus is coming together there means a shift, a change in career, a new a new slant to his career. We also have the moon. Solar arc progressed is on his descendant. So what we're looking for with important events in a person's life is when the luminaries, that's the sun and the moon, are in close proximity to the ascendant or the midheaven. So now we have not only the nodes but also the sun close to the ascendant, solar progressed sun that is, and the solar progressed moon close to the descendant. That for me is powerful. What Hillary lacked in hers was the involvement of both the moon and the sun in terms of the progressions, and there was a lot of Neptune. Donald Trump also has some Neptune because his solar arc progressed ascendant is square Neptune. But as we've seen with a lot of these political leaders, Theresa May, it seems an essential element to have a little bit of Neptune there. It's probably because voting is such a process that involves absolutely everyone, and it kind of seeps into the collective unconscious. So having a leader with Neptune shows that they are at some level tapping in to public need, public perception, and you need to do that to get any votes at all. And of course I talked about the node. Oh yes, his Venus is conjunct Neptune over there. So again, there's the presence of Neptune, and that he's tapping into something, tapping into the collective unconscious, tapping into feelings, needs of people that are not being expressed. So what else can we say about Donald Trump? He has these planets. He has planets in Gemini, and he has 3 important personal planets in Cancer. So out of the 2 candidates, he's definitely the more nationalistic one, because planets in Cancer signify an attachment, an identification with hometown, home country. So it is important to him, whereas Hillary has got more the international approach. So I think Donald Trump is going to go after people in the Rust Belt, in the mining towns, the people that feel that they are not represented by this whole global approach, that they are losing out with agreements like NAFTA and whatever, and he can really go after that. Like we see with Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland. With nationalism, there are a lot of votes to be won. And with Donald Trump, he knows that. And so he's going to play the nationalist card, get people fired up. Think of his slogans. America is make America great again. That is something that really gets people fired up. He's using a lot of the slogans that Ronald Reagan used. Now, Reagan was an actor. He was only a 1-term senator. And yet, he managed to unseat the incumbent, Jimmy Carter. Reagan was way, way behind in the polls, but he came out with very similar slogans to what Donald Trump is using. They resonated with people, they got people fired up. Whereas Hillary's slogans are a little bit bland. I don't think they're really tuning in to what people want. Another thing that Donald Trump is doing is he's going to go for policies that tap into emotion, like we see with his Mercury square Neptune, and Neptune so emphasized in his solar arcs. He'll go for emotive topics like immigration, subjects you can pack a lot of emotion around, which get people inspired and listening to you. Nigel Farage says many times that during the Brexit campaign, the reason they talked a lot about immigration is every time they did, there was a bounce in the polls, so they kept doing it, and Donald Trump's going to use the same thing. Another thing he has in his favour is what I call the Putin effect. Now, I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that people are queuing up at the Russian embassy because they want to immigrate to Russia and to live there. But around the world, there's a kind of quiet respect for Vladimir Putin. It's the alpha male thing, and he seems to put Russia first. He seems to want to make Russia great again, and he is thinking of Russia's interests, and people do aspire to that. And Donald Trump's the same kind of person, is also this alpha male, puts his country first, bringing jobs back to America. It's exactly what we saw when Boris Johnson came out at the end of that last debate before the Brexit vote, and he talked, take back control, make June the 24th our Independence Day. Let's, it was the same kind of thing. It's Britain, we're stronger as Britain, we don't need to be part of the EU. That really inspired people. It got him a standing ovation, and it shows very similar to Donald Trump's slogans, how that really gets people going. We can't rely on is in this election as well is the polls, because just as with Brexit, the media and the metropolitan elite have almost smeared voters in saying that if you're voting out or if you're voting Donald Trump, you're uneducated, you're xenophobic, you small-minded, all these negative things. So of course when people are polled, are they going to say honestly, yes, I'm voting for Trump? No, they're probably not. But what they do in the polling station when they're in absolute private is a very, very different thing. And so that's why the polls definitely can't be relied on, and there's a long way to go. Now, I did a chart at the time when Donald Trump made his acceptance speech to see how it was looking. And it did look very good. The moon was waning, planets were in good positions. A lot of planets were in the 29th degree of their sign, which indicates a massive amount of unpredictability now in his campaign moving towards November. So things will be up and down, you'll never know what's going to happen. Hugely unpredictable, yet positive. Whereas when I looked at Hillary's, hers the moon was where the sun, at the time she went over the top, as they say, when she had enough nominations. So it wasn't looking quite as good. In fact, it was looking at her as if her campaign was going to peak and then go somewhat into decline. So I also had a look at the chart of Mike Pence, his running mate, just to see how that looked, and I was absolutely amazed at both the transits and the solar arcs that was presenting. I didn't think it was interesting enough to go over because we're not really aware too much of what Mike Pence is about in general, but it showed to me as well that there is just a slight possibility that even if Donald Trump didn't see out his term, for any reason, that Mike Pence might come into play as the vice president, taking over a lot of the powers, or he might have a lot of power and control. So that was interesting to me. So we have a very strong chart for Donald Trump, a lot of in his favor, a very strong chart for Mike Pence. So I'm thinking that he may just do this. I know people say, well, Hillary's got all the female vote, she's got the Latino vote, etc., the ethnic minority vote, and the educated vote. But when you think about it, with the Latino vote, that would feature most strongly in influencing the polls in like Colorado, New Mexico, California, states where Donald Trump is not really anticipating winning and where Republicans don't generally win anyway. So whether he has or doesn't have that support shouldn't play out extremely importantly in the overall result. As far as Hillary having the women's vote, well, if anyone's ever studied sort of mass psychology, the dynamics in social spaces, you would know that women don't always stand together. Men are the ones who always stick together. They rarely gang up and fight each other. Oh, we're not talking about gangs here and things like that. Just in general, office dynamics, group dynamics, family. It's always the men that get on with each other. Women just don't seem to. They always lock horns with other women. They splinter off into different groups. They kind of develop real antagonistic attitudes towards each other. So I don't think it's a dead cert that women are naturally going to be for Hillary. There'll be some that are for her, there'll be some that are definitely against, because women very often do not support other women. So I think that probably before the election we'll have a little update, see how things are going, have a recap and talk about a few more things. But I think the media have underestimated Donald Trump. They need to have a little rethink. I'm going right down to the betting shop and I'm going to put a tenner on Donald Trump.